6:58 a.m., Tuesday, Texas. A security officer unlocks a business hotel room after 2 unanswered knocks. On the carpet, a 28-year-old man. On the bed, a 25-year-old woman. On the table, 2 glasses and a printed DWC IAH itinerary. According to the keycard log, a 26-year-old bride entered at 12:49 a.m. and never used the corridor exit again. Outside, the night had been warm with a short thunderstorm after 11 p.m., the kind that leaves hall carpets humming with air conditioner white noise. Cameras cover the elevator lobby and the hallway. There is no camera inside the room. A neighbor on the floor reports a single dull thud around 1:08 a.m. No fire alarm, no calls to the front desk.
This is not a story about fate. It's a chain of choices. 5 years of courtship, 7 days of marriage, and 1 night that ended 2 lives. We'll keep to what can be verified. Timestamps, card swipes, billing records, flight stubs, and the digital trail across 3 phones. The victim list is clear. The emotions are not. She was 26, 7 days married, and trained to live by schedules. Public records place her in international schools where rubrics mattered more than improvisation. Former classmates recall punctuality, correct greetings, and a calm that read as distance. Family photographs show events and sponsors, not birthdays around a kitchen table. Staff rosters, not diaries, map her childhood house. Precision, in her life, often stood where affection should have been. Teachers describe a student who treated instructions as shelter. She excelled when expectations were explicit and timelines firm. Friends say she planned vacations like projects and turned gifts into lists. Etiquette notes in her exchange files sit beside flight stubs and grade reports. Nothing in that paper trail suggests chaos. Everything suggests control as a learned language. He was 28, split between 2 countries, and fluent in both. Early years with his mother in the United States were modest. A later move to Dubai under his father changed the trajectory. Colleagues remember speed, charm, and a willingness to take useful risks. He could make reluctant rooms move without raising his voice. Bilingual meetings gave him leverage. Options for him felt like safety. Their overlap begins in alumni and business circuits rather than in chance. Photos put them in the same venues months before captions put them together. According to friends, the poll was complementary. She valued his decisiveness. He valued her access. He supplied tempo when decisions stalled. She supplied legitimacy when signatures mattered. Attraction and advantage can share a border without announcing it. For roughly 5 years, they looked stable from a distance. Travel posts were clean, seating at fundraisers careful, public conversations free of friction. Privately, boundaries read like negotiated clauses. According to her circle, she measured trust by predictability, call windows, itineraries, returns that matched claims. According to people on his teams, he measured progress by outcomes, not schedules. Those models run parallel until pressure forces a turn. Early warnings were digital and small. Contacts saved without names appeared on his phone bill. Messages set to disappear replaced ordinary threads. A claimed meeting did not line up with a badge swipe on one Thursday, then another. She noticed because noticing was a skill learned young. He adjusted platforms and timings because adjustment preserved options. Employment braided their lives tighter. Her father's company placed him on projects where language and nerve paid off. Access logs later showed late entries into rooms junior staff rarely used. Vendor calendars began to include him by default. Success masked the drag success creates. Buildings record doors and timestamps, not context. A third hire appeared on the same floors months before the engagement. She was 25, newly relocated, and listed as mid-level with a standard probation. Mentorship explained joint reviews and after-hours edits. Repeated overlaps after 9 in enclosed rooms explained the rest. No formal complaint was filed. Policy stopped at inference. Inference is not procedure. The proposal fit the family architecture in Dubai.
right witnesses, right camera angles, right statements about the future. There is no documented hesitation in the official record. Planning moved like a well-run event. Vendors confirmed, contract signed, travel arranged. She handled checklists, he handled audiences. Each performed the role expected of them.
7 days after the vows, the plan diverged. He cited business instead of a honeymoon and routed to Texas near a partner office. Her calls began to miss their usual marks and return as voicemail. She returned to the method that kept her steady: compare logs to claims, facts to explanations. He returned to the method that kept him mobile: change platforms, keep moving. The gap between them became measurable rather than guessed.
None of this proves what happened later. It explains how they arrived at a locked door with no camera inside. Her safety tool was structure, verification, and a ledger of small facts. His freedom tool was concealment, speed, and alternate channels. Facades hold until timestamps disagree. When they did here, the story stopped looking like romance and started reading like procedure. The rest would be reconstruction, not speculation. She was 25, newly relocated, and logged by HR as a mid-level hire on 6 months probation. Recruiters sold the move as a step up. Her references were clean and practical. Coworkers from her old office later said she did careful work that rarely reached decision rooms. In Dubai, she landed 2 floors below executive operations, close to influence but not inside it. Attendance was steady, deliverables precise, emails clipped. Nothing in that start reads a scandal. Proximity came disguised as mentorship. Calendars show her joining a vendor integration stream he already led. The label explained lake walkthroughs and dry runs in half-lit conference rooms. He translated between Arabic and English. She cleaned numbers and slides. Together, the output moved faster through cautious committees. Results earned more time in the same rooms. Architecture recorded the shift before anyone named it. After hours, they stopped using open-plan desks and booked glass rooms with blinds. Facilities tickets note a privacy film replacement on one door. Adhesive failed after repeated lowering. Security logs capture longer evening sessions labeled with generic titles: alignment, follow-up, scope. Generic titles travel well, especially when no one wants questions. Buildings keep better diaries than people. Devices added texture to the pattern. Her phone backed up nightly. His did not. Version history on shared decks shows edits from her laptop and from a private account later linked to him. Edits were small: phrasing, totals, a corrected axis. Exactly the kind of work that hides because it helps. Metadata timestamps tighten around weekends and late evenings. Motive is not visible in a spreadsheet. Rhythm is. Colleagues noticed results before they noticed overlaps. A stalled pilot moved after their joint review. A hesitant partner signed within 48 hours. Praise flowed upward with his name attached and sideways to her inbox after midnight. Credit in that building tended to climb. No one filed a complaint. No one wanted to guess wrong. Policy stops at the edge of inference. Disclosure lagged. He did not mention an engagement at first, according to 2 coworkers interviewed later. When family posts made it obvious, he framed the marriage as alignment, not romance. The phrase appears in a message exported from her laptop. It proves the wording, not belief. Belief shows up in choices. Choices kept them close. Management adjusted only what could be verified. Their line manager split a few tasks to reduce direct reporting and log the change. Both completed a workplace conduct module the same week, timestamps 6 minutes apart. No warning was issued, there was no incident to cite. In offices that run on plausible deniability, the absence of a sentence is a shield. Shields work until they don't. Outside the building, the trail blended work and preference. Travel calendars put him in 2 cities where she had vendor demos, plausible for his role. Hotel loyalty data later showed 1 overlap by district and date. Public photos stayed clean. Never the same frame, never the same caption. Posts spoke about momentum and gratitude. Momentum blurs lines when no one is paid to slow down. Communication shifted off-platform in the month before the wedding. Recovery logs show more end-to-end encrypted chats and fewer emails. She moved status updates into restricted folders with trimmed audit trails. He kept booking rooms under generic titles after 9. The surface thinned while the pattern thickened. Thin surfaces tear first. Pressure presented as small mismatches anyone could explain. A missed check-in that landed on last-minute scope, a badge swipe into a floor he rarely used, 2 buffer blocks that overlapped when buffers shouldn't. Each item is ordinary alone. Together, they form a third line inside a picture framed for 2. Lines like that are easy to ignore until someone traces them with a finger. Then, they are all you see. He arrived first at a business hotel near the partner office, a routine check-in that drew no attention. Staff notes mention a late meal and a request to keep calls from the front desk to a minimum. Cameras show him moving alone between lobby and elevator with a single carry-on. Corridor traffic that evening stayed ordinary. Guests with laptops, ice buckets, muted conversation. Nothing on video suggests stress, pursuit, or an argument in public view. The setting reads as preparation, not alarm. A colleague visited the floor later, according to corridor footage and room service receipts. She stayed long enough for 2 trays and left carrying a tablet and jacket. No noise complaints reached the desk, and no one noted raised voices. The version that fits best is work finishing past dinner, the kind of overlap offices normalize. It is important only because it places her in the same space that evening. After she leaves, the corridor returns to quiet. Closer to midnight, the bride reached the hotel after an international flight and a direct ride, based on travel records. She carried a small bag and did not stop at the front desk, which is consistent with someone heading to a known room. Lobby footage shows a brief pause at the fire escape map before she took the elevator. The camera does not capture her face in detail, but clothing and build match prior images from the airport. She appears composed, not hurried. The decision to proceed looks settled before the elevator doors close. The room itself has no camera, so the interior timeline relies on indirect signals. A smart TV goes idle shortly after her arrival, according to device logs. A bedside clock is later found on the carpet, battery knocked loose, a detail the report treats as a fall during movement. A neighbor recalled a single dull impact in the small hours, no voices, no alarm. None of this describes a prolonged struggle. It suggests speed, intent, and control of the space. When investigators entered later, the layout told a compact story. He was on the floor near the foot of the bed, angled toward the door as if turning or rising. She, the colleague, lay on the mattress with covers pulled to the waist and one arm at a defensive angle. A chair had tipped over. Nothing else in the room was disordered. No weapon appeared in view, and there was no visible blood spatter. Air conditioning held a steady temperature through the night. Cause of death was listed as asphyxia for both, with a short gap between the two, according to the medical report. The absence of ligature impressions consistent with cords or belts pointed to manual force, though the wording remained careful. Superficial marks on the husband's forearms supported brief resistance. The colleague's wrist carried a single deep abrasion, consistent with a grip rather than a fall. Toxicology was unremarkable, no sedatives were detected. The scene reads as physical dominance applied fast. The door log shows routine interior locking after her entry and no corridor exit until security opened in the morning. That matters because it confines events to a window without external interference. Housekeeping noted a do not disturb sign during the first round and moved on. A courtesy call went unanswered. Front desk policy required a welfare check after missed knocks. The master key opened easily. The chain was not set. What began in private ended under fluorescent light. Digital trails added motive where the room could not. On her device, investigators recovered screenshots of message threads between the husband and the colleague saved locally despite disappearing settings. Flight and hotel lookups from earlier that day placed her on the same path he took, narrowed to nearby properties. His phone showed recent deletes, but cache previews preserved images and timestamps. The colleague's calendar contained vendor sessions matching his trip, a link consistent with legitimate work. Together, the records collapse coincidence into pattern. Material items were few but specific. 2 glasses on the table carried mixed prints. Lipstick residue matched the colleague. A folded itinerary, DWC to IAH, lay under a receipts envelope, which the report notes but cannot tie to intent beyond travel. Gloves were found in the bride's bag, consistent with the absence of usable prints on metal surfaces. No fibers in the room matched her coat. The coat itself showed no tearing. The choices indicate planning without theatrics. According to police summaries, her demeanor after discovery was controlled and verbal. She did not attempt to leave the property and did not resist when asked to wait for officers. The words attributed to her in the report are brief and definitive, not emotional. She acknowledged actions and did not frame them as accident. The lack of flight does not alter the charge, it fixes state of mind. Prosecutors later described it as certainty rather than shock. What the night demonstrates, stripped of speculation, is a narrow arc. He set a place to sleep and to meet, believing the day was routine. The colleague arrived, ate, and left, believing the evening was work extended. The bride entered with knowledge gathered in advance, verified by travel and device records. Inside a quiet room, force replaced conversation for less than a minute at a time. By morning, the hotel had 2 bodies and a timeline that fit on 1 page. The room was processed in a standard sequence: scene photography, temperature read, trace collection, device seizure. Air conditioning held the room at a steady 69 degrees Fahrenheit through the night, which narrowed but did not fix the post-mortem window. Lividity on both bodies suggested a short interval between deaths and limited repositioning. According to the preliminary report, no visible blood spatter, no bullets, and no edged weapons were present. The single-tipped chair and a bedside clock on the carpet were the only signs of movement. Nothing in the layout indicated a prolonged struggle. Keycard logs mattered because they fenced the timeline. The door recorded an interior open when she arrived and a manual deadbolt slide minutes later. There were no corridor exits until security used a master key in the morning. Hall cameras showed no third-party approach to the door after midnight. The colleague's earlier visit and departure were captured cleanly, with no return. Procedure treats that absence as exclusion, not certainty, but the effect is the same. On the table sat 2 glasses and a folded flight itinerary. Prints on the glassware were mixed and partial. Lipstick residue linked to the colleague per lab swabs. The itinerary, DWC to IAH, matched her travel but proved only movement, not motive. The minibar showed no anomalies beyond the 2 charges tied to room service trays. Housekeeping noted no missing linens or cutlery. The scene read sparse by choice, not by accident. The medical examiner listed asphyxia for both decedents, with a gap of minutes rather than hours. There were no clear ligature impressions consistent with cords or belts. Fingernail scrapings from the husband yielded trace fibers matching the bedspread, consistent with brief grasping rather than extended combat. The colleague's dominant wrist showed a single deep abrasion, described as grip pressure rather than a fall. Toxicology panels were negative for sedatives and alcohol above social levels. The wording stayed cautious, but the pattern suggested fast, direct force. Glove use was inferred from surfaces without usable prints. The door hardware, faucet handles, and remote control returned smudged or null results. A pair of thin gloves was recovered from her bag, clean except for dust consistent with the hotel corridor. No torn fibers on her coat matched fibers at the scene. Investigators noted the absence of stray hair and skin cells in obvious touch points. According to the evidence log, that level of cleanliness is uncommon in impulsive assaults. Digital forensics filled gaps the room could not. The smart TV log showed an idle state initiated shortly after her arrival, aligning with a manual power-off. The room's Wi-Fi controller recorded 2 device associations earlier in the evening, his phone and the colleague's tablet, then a new handset later attributed to her, connected briefly with data disabled. Elevator controllers retained timestamps for her 2 rides, up near midnight and a short down and up loop consistent with the service corridor pass. None of these entries prove intent. Together, they remove guesswork. Phone analysis produced motive context without relying on confession. On her device, screenshots of threads between him and the colleague had been saved locally despite disappearing settings, with timestamps that matched earlier trips. His handset showed recent deletions but left thumbnail caches of images and calendar snippets in application storage. The colleague's work calendar carried vendor sessions in the same city, explaining presence but not proximity. Carrier records placed his number and hers in the hotel sector the entire night. Those records are routine in isolation. They are directional in sequence. Financial traces aligned with movement. Her rideshare receipt showed a direct route from the airport to the hotel with no intermediate stops. His folio listed 2 room service orders and no bar charges downstairs, consistent with staying in. The colleague's expense report later attached a taxi receipt from the hotel block to her apartment, timestamped shortly after her exit. No additional charges appeared after midnight. The paper trails supported a quiet floor and a closed door. Forensic timelines rely on intervals, not single ticks. Estimated times of death were bounded by last known movement, device inactivity, and body temperature at discovery. The stopped clock at the bedside was treated as suggestive but not determinative. The neighbor's note about a dull impact at an approximate minute served as a soft anchor. Investigators cross-checked those anchors against the elevator and Wi-Fi logs. The result was a window narrow enough to exclude outsiders. What remained for prosecutors was state of mind. The purchase of a last-minute international ticket under a maiden name could be read as privacy or planning. Gloves in a bag could be read as winter habit or a preparation to leave no prints. A calm wait for police could be read as shock or certainty. The case file marked each item with that forked reading and then returned to sequence: arrival, entry, force, stillness, discovery. In court, sequence carries more weight than adjectives. The evidentiary picture, taken together, was compact. No weapon to misplace, no third party on camera after midnight, no signs of extended chaos. The room told a brief story. The devices told a longer one. According to the summary memo, the physical and digital trails converged on the same hour and the same 3 people. Where motive language remained contested, the minutes did not. In this kind of case, minutes decide. Prosecutors framed motive as cumulative rather than sudden. They pointed to 5 years of on and off suspicion, a wedding followed by an immediate business trip, and a colleague whose schedule matched his. The story they told was arithmetic. Suspicion plus access plus opportunity equals intent. They did not claim a confession, they claimed convergence. In this narrative, the room was the endpoint, not the spark. Courts are more comfortable with numbers than with impulses. Planning was argued through sequence and selection. A last-minute international ticket under her maiden name insulated the search results from casual scans. Carry-on only removed the friction of baggage claim and reduced cameras. Airplane mode limited carrier pings. Gloves limited latent prints. The brief detour through the service corridor suggested prior thought about sightlines. None of these facts prove forethought alone. Together, they read like a checklist. The defense countered with context and erosion. According to their experts, chronic deceit can function as coercive control, narrowing a person's perceived options until a single act feels inevitable. They emphasized her upbringing in emotional scarcity and her learned dependence on structure for safety. They argued she gathered evidence not to plan violence, but to reclaim certainty denied by repeated lies. In this view, the flight was confrontation, not hunt. The hotel became the place where control finally failed. Digital artifacts carried weight on both sides. Screenshots on her phone preserved threads that disappearing settings were supposed to erase. Search histories showed hotel blocks near his partner's office and corporate directories that listed the colleague's travel. Prosecutors said this was pre-attack reconnaissance. The defense said it was verification, the same behavior she had used for years when words and logs diverged. The label attached to the act changed its moral meaning. Behavior after the deaths drew sharp readings. She did not flee, did not hide, and did not flood the room with noise or staged chaos. Prosecutors called that composure, a sign of a settled mind. The defense called it dissociation, a practiced calm from someone trained to hold posture under stress. A calm person can be calculating. A calm person can also be empty. Jurors had to decide which calm they saw. Time windows were presented as moral borders. Buying the ticket, boarding, and riding to the hotel each offered an exit ramp. So did the stop at the lobby map and the moment before knocking. Prosecutors highlighted each ramp as a chance not taken. The defense answered that every ramp is visible to outsiders, but not to someone who believes there is no longer a middle ground. The same staircase looks different depending on who is falling. The colleague's role was stripped of romance and placed into power. Emails and access badges showed proximity that policy discouraged but did not forbid. She was a beneficiary of his attention inside a structure that rewarded quiet compliance. Prosecutors avoided punishing her for office culture. They kept the narrative narrow: presence, intimacy, consequence. The defense warned against turning workplace ambiguity into retroactive provocation. The court kept returning to sequence. Material choices were presented as silent testimony. Gloves in a bag and a phone in airplane mode make sense as winter habits and travel discipline. They also make sense as contamination control. The service level pass can be read as curiosity about exits or as an attempt to move unseen. The Gedbolt slide can mean privacy for a conversation or sealing a stage. In evidence law, objects do not speak. Lawyers assign them verbs. Jurors listen for the one that fits. Expert witnesses introduced language that sounds clinical until it isn't. Psychologists described betrayal injury and rumination loops that convert suspicion into mission. Forensic analysts translated metadata into minutes and minutes into opportunities. The two vocabularies brushed but did not merge. One says why, the other says when. The verdict lives where they overlap. What moved the case was the collapse of coincidence. A travel itinerary that mirrors his, a colleague present earlier that night, a door log without outsider entries, a pair of bodies inside a controlled space. Motive did not need poetry, it needed probability. The state argued that the most likely story is the one that devices tell without adjectives. The defense argued that likelihood is not certainty, especially around intention. The threshold, in the end, was defined less by psychology and more by sequence. Arrive, enter, apply force, wait, call. Nothing in that order is illegal until the third verb. Everything before it can be framed as preparation or as proof gathering. Everything after it is consequence. The chapter closes where law prefers to stand, on the minutes that cannot be wished away. Jury selection moved quickly for a case with this level of attention. The court seated 12 and 2 alternates after 3 days, prioritizing people who could read technical exhibits without drifting. A gag order kept counsel off cameras. Filings carried most of the narrative load. The state previewed a straight line built from devices and doors. The defense previewed erosion and collapse, not a plan. Both sides agreed on sequence. They disagreed on state of mind. The prosecution opened with structure. Key card logs fenced the room. Elevator records fenced the floor. Camera stills fenced the corridor. A forensic analyst walked the jury through timestamps that did not argue back. The medical examiner stayed inside careful language about asphyxia and short intervals. The absence of an outside entrant after midnight did the rest of the exclusion work. Digital evidence followed. A detective explained how disappearing messages leave cached previews and how version history preserves who touched what and when. Carrier logs located 3 devices under the same roof while the tower sector stayed quiet. The hotel network showed brief association from her handset with data off, a detail used to argue control. Screenshots on her phone preserved threads that motive language could attach to without relying on confession. The defense answered with psychology and context. An expert described the effects of sustained deceit on decision-making, using terms that map poorly onto statutes but well onto human behavior. They recentered her upbringing, her reliance on structure, and the way predictability can be mistaken for safety. They called the flight a confrontation built on verification, not on hunting. They conceded force and contested intent.
Witnesses were procedural and restrained. Hotel staff confirmed knocks, master keys, and wellness checks. Co-workers confirmed overlapping calendars and after-hours rooms without speculating beyond what they saw. HR produced policy modules and task reassignments, documented but thin. No witness transformed the case, the exhibits did. Jurors watched monitors more than faces.
Closing arguments returned to arithmetic. The state summarized arrival, entry, force, stillness, and discovery, and asked the jury to follow the minutes. They framed calm as composure and composure as certainty. The defense summarized the same minutes and named them collapse, not calculation. They argued that every apparent exit ramp is obvious only in hindsight. The judge instructed on intent, premeditation, and reasonable doubt, in neutral terms. Deliberations lasted parts of 2 days. Notes to the court asked for replay of the elevator footage and a reread of the medical examiner's time window. No note asked for a definition of asphyxia or for the elements of lesser charges. When the jury returned, the clerk recorded guilty on both counts. The foreperson kept their eyes on the verdict form, not the tables. The record shows no outburst. Sentencing referenced the guideline grid and the aggravators on the indictment. Multiple victims and planning indicators placed the case high, even without a weapon. The judge acknowledged mitigation submissions about upbringing and emotional scarcity, and then returned to sequence. Life imprisonment was imposed, with parole ineligibility framed by state law. She stood without visible reaction, and remained so when let out. The transcript records brevity, not apology. The immediate aftermath moved along predictable lines. Defense filed notice of appeal on evidentiary grounds and judicial discretion at sentencing. The state prepared to defend the admissibility of device caches and network logs, now routine in modern cases. A separate civil claim from one family followed, seeking declaratory findings that tracked the criminal verdict. Corporate partners in Texas updated security protocols, the Dubai office revised conduct training and access governance. Public statements were brief and abstract. Prison classification placed her in a high-security women's facility with medical and educational programs. Intake noted language skills, no substance issues, and low disciplinary risk. Visits would be limited and recorded, correspondence screened. Attorneys scheduled appellate briefings around transcript production and exhibit duplication. Appeals do not relitigate facts, they test doors the trial already closed. The timeline, not the adjectives, would be the center again. Families absorbed the outcome differently. His mother's statement referenced a child who moved between households before he learned to stop moving. The colleague's relatives described a worker who moved for recognition and found something else. Her family released a short paragraph about tragedy and the weight of choices. Memorials remained private. None of those texts changed the minutes that decided the case. The public moved on at the speed news moves, but the file did not. It will be cited in trainings about digital reconstruction and in lectures about motive without confession. It will be footnoted in HR presentations about proximity and policy, and in hotel protocols about wellness checks. It will be used to show that most violence is short and most evidence is patient. Behind each exhibit sits a room with no camera and a sequence that does not bend. This is not a love story. It is a chain of decisions. Lies dressed up as career do not nullify the law. Jealousy wrapped in pain does not turn violence into defense. If you recognize your own outline here, stop at facts, not force. Seek counsel, family law attorneys, therapists, and build a safe exit plan. Violence always has a backstory. Accountability does too.